time, we're taking a look at solar energy.
Sounds bright.
Yeah. You've sent us over some really cool stuff, actually.
Okay.
It looks like an article about this new children's book on solar energy,
Oh, nice.
and then a PDF that I think is like a teaching guide to go along with it.
All right.
So you're really looking to understand this, huh?
Yeah. Looks like it's going to be from start to finish, huh? From the sun to the outlet.
Exactly. Well, let's try to break it all down in a way that makes sense. Maybe we'll uncover some interesting things along the way.
Sounds good to me.
So I think it's interesting that these sources are, well, they're made for kids,
Right.
but the science behind it is, kind of for everyone. It's not just,
Yeah,
dumbed down or anything.
absolutely.
So to start, like, our journey, we have to go to the source of it all,
Oh, okay.
the sun.
It's always a good place to start, and it's kind of amazing to think about. But our sun is actually just a giant nuclear fusion reactor.
Okay, wait. A nuclear fusion reactor?
Yeah.
That
Big
sounds...
space.
It sounds a little more intense than a day at the beach, don't you think?
Well, yeah, it's pretty intense. Deep inside the sun's core, there are all these hydrogen atoms. And they're being squeezed together under immense pressure and heat. And when they fuse together to form helium, this releases a tremendous amount of energy as light and heat.
So let me get this straight. Every ray of sunshine that we feel is the result of atoms fusing together, millions of miles away.
Precisely.
Wow.
And that energy, it travels to the Earth as photons,
Okay.
these tiny little packets of energy, and they move at the speed of light.
Wait, the speed of light, isn't that like the fastest thing there is?
The fastest. And because those photons are traveling so ridiculously fast, it only takes them like 8 minutes to travel those 93 million miles from the sun to the Earth.
So every sunbeam that we feel is basically a little time traveler,
Exactly.
carrying energy that's 8 minutes old.
It's true. It's kind of like the sun is sending us a message from the past.
That's kind of blowing my mind. So we're literally basking in ancient sunlight.
Uh-huh, yeah.
But the source material mentions these things called sunspots and solar flares.
Right.
What exactly are those?
So sunspots, you can kind of think about them as like temporary freckles on the surface of the sun. They're cooler and darker than the areas around them.
Okay.
And they happen because of all the intense magnetic activity going on inside the sun.
So it's like the sun has its own version of weather patterns.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And then there are solar flares, which are these sudden bursts of energy and radiation that come from the sun. It's kind of like the sun is sneezing.
Yeah.
And those sneezes can sometimes disrupt things like radio communications here on Earth.
Wow. So the sun is way more complex than I realized.
Oh, yeah.
But how do we go from this giant fiery ball of fusing atoms to actually generating electricity? The kind we can actually use here on Earth.
Well, to understand that, we're going to have to zoom way in to the world of atoms.
Atoms.
Yeah, the tiny building blocks of everything around us.
So you're saying that to harness this incredible power of the sun, we need to understand something smaller than a grain of sand.
That's right. And you see, atoms are actually kind of like miniature solar systems themselves.
Oh, okay.
They've got a nucleus in the center made up of these particles called protons and neutrons.
Right.
And then they've got these tiny electrons whizzing around the nucleus in specific orbits.
I never thought about atoms being like tiny solar systems. That's pretty amazing.
It is.
So how does this all tie back into solar energy?
Well, it's all about how these electrons behave. They determine an atom's properties, including how well it conducts electricity.
So are you saying that solar panels are essentially manipulating these tiny electrons to create usable energy?
That's exactly what's happening. And the secret weapon in this whole process is a very special material called silicon.
Silicon, isn't that what computer chips are made of?
That's right. Silicon is a semiconductor, and it's the foundation of both computer chips and solar panels.
Okay, so silicon is a semiconductor.
Yes.
But what exactly does that mean?
Well, think of it this way. Some materials, like copper wires, they're like superhighways for electricity. Electrons flow through them really easily, and those are called conductors.
Okay, that makes sense.
Right.
So then what about materials that actually block electricity?
Those are insulators, like the rubber coating you might see around a copper wire. They're like roadblocks for those electrons. They prevent them from flowing through.
So semiconductors are somewhere in between conductors and insulators.
Precisely. They can conduct electricity, but not as freely as a conductor. And here's the cool part. We can actually manipulate silicon's conductivity through a process called doping.
Doping. Is that even allowed?
Haha. Well, it is in the world of material science. Doping basically means we're adding tiny amounts of other elements to the silicon
Okay.
to change how easily the electrons move around inside it.
Okay, I'm intrigued, but why would we want to do that?
Well, imagine like a dance floor, okay?
Okay.
An N-type silicon, it's packed with dancers. Those are our electrons.
Okay.
But P-type silicon, it's got some open spots on the dance floor. And the music, in this case, is sunlight, which gives those electrons enough energy to jump to those open spots.
So it's kind of like we're choreographing a microscopic dance party inside the silicon to generate electricity.
Haha. Yeah. It's a pretty amazing process.
That's wild. So we've got our silicon panel. It's got these special N-type and P-type layers. It's all set up.
Right.
What happens when sunlight hits it?
What happens indeed.
Okay, so we've made it from the sun's core all the way to these silicon panels.
Right.
And when sunlight hits those panels, it basically sets off this chain reaction.
Exactly.
That creates an electrical current.
You got it. And that process, the one where light gets turned directly into electricity,
Right.
it's called the photovoltaic effect.
Photovoltaic effect.
It's pretty remarkable when you think about it. We're basically taking the power of the sun and turning it into, clean energy.
Yeah. It is amazing. So the sun's energy becomes electricity
Right.
in the solar panel.
Yeah.
But how do we get that electricity to actually, power things? Like lights in our homes.
Right. Well, that's where things like LED light bulbs and batteries come in.
Okay.
So let's start with LEDs. Those energy-efficient light bulbs, they're kind of everywhere these days,
Yeah.
So those teeny tiny LEDs, they're revolutionizing lighting because they actually use a principle similar to solar panels,
Okay.
but in reverse.
Oh, interesting. So instead of sunlight creating electricity, in this case, it's the electricity that creates light.
Exactly. Remember when we talked about those photons from the sun?
Yeah.
Those tiny packets of energy? Well, in a solar panel, they hit the silicon atoms
Right.
and knock electrons loose.
Okay.
But in an LED, it's the electricity that's doing the knocking.
So are those photons like microscopic wrecking balls smashing into atoms and setting those electrons free?
That's a pretty great way to think about it.
Cool. So then what happens?
Well, remember those N-type and P-type layers we talked about in silicon?
Yeah.
LEDs have a similar structure with a component called a diode, which is made from semiconductors, just like in a solar panel.
So it's like a mini solar panel, but in reverse.
You got it.
And I'm guessing the N-type and P-type doping comes into play here too.
Absolutely. When electricity flows through that diode, electrons move from the N-type side, which is packed with electrons, to the P-type side, which has those holes where electrons are missing.
Right.
And when those electrons move to fill in those holes,
Yeah.
they release energy. But instead of heat, they release it as light. That's what we see.
Like this tiny electrical fireworks show. It's happening inside each little LED.
Haha, that's a fantastic analogy. And the reason LEDs are so energy efficient is because they're really good at this process. They convert most of the electricity into light instead of wasting it as heat, like those old school incandescent bulbs.
Right. Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
But what about, when the sun goes down, I can't exactly just rely on solar panels to power my home at night.
That's a great point. You're right. And that's where batteries come in.
Mhm.
Think of them as like energy banks for your solar power system. They store the energy generated during the day so you can use it later.
Okay. So how exactly do batteries work? How do they, store the electricity?
Batteries store energy through these chemical reactions. Basically, inside a battery, you've got chemicals that can absorb and release electrons.
Oh.
When you charge a battery, with electricity from your solar panels,
Okay.
the electrons flow into the battery.
Right.
And that causes a chemical change. And that's essentially storing energy.
So the battery is using chemistry
Pretty much.
to trap those energetic little electrons. It's like putting them in timeout until we actually need them.
Ha ha ha.
So when we do need to use that stored energy, how does it get released to actually power things?
Well, it's actually pretty simple. When you connect a device to the battery, that chemical reaction reverses. And when it reverses, it releases the electrons
Okay.
and creates an electrical current. And that current powers your devices.
That's awesome. So we've got our solar panels capturing the sun's energy, LEDs using it efficiently,
Right.
and batteries storing it for later use. So is that all there is to a complete solar energy system?
Well, there are a couple more components that we should probably talk about to
Okay.
make sure everything runs smoothly and safely. They're called the charge controller and the inverter.
Okay. The charge controller.
Yeah, think of it as like the traffic cop of your solar power system.
Oh, okay.
It regulates the flow of electricity between your solar panels and the battery.
So why do you need that? Like, what's it controlling?
Well, imagine if you kept trying to fill up a glass of water that was already full.
You'd have a mess.
Exactly. The same thing can happen with a battery.
Mhm.
If it gets too much electricity too quickly, it can get damaged.
Ah, okay.
So the charge controller makes sure that doesn't happen. It lets the battery charge safely and efficiently.
So it's like a safety valve making sure the battery doesn't explode or something.
Uh-huh, right. And then there's the inverter. And that's got a totally different but equally important job. It converts direct current, or DC,
Right?
which is what solar panels and batteries produce,
Oh,
into alternating current, or AC. And that's what most of the appliances in our homes use. So it's like a language translator for electricity.
so the solar panels and batteries speak DC, but our appliances speak AC.
Uh-huh.
And
Exactly.
the inverter helps them, like, understand each other.
Exactly. And with an inverter, we can use that solar energy to power almost anything in our homes.
That's really cool. So we've covered the main components of this solar energy system,
It seems like it.
from capturing the sun's energy to storing it and then converting it so we can actually use it in our homes. Is there anything else that you think our listeners should know before we kind of wrap up our solar energy deep dive?
Well, we've talked a lot about how solar energy works,
Right.
but we haven't really talked about why it's such a big deal. Like what's the impact of all this?
You're right. We kind of got caught up in all the cool tech stuff.
Yeah, it is pretty cool.
But yeah, what about the bigger picture? Why is solar energy, why is it such a big deal?
Well, think about this. One of the most important things about solar energy is that it's clean and renewable.
Okay.
So unlike fossil fuels,
Uh-huh.
which release all those harmful pollutants when you burn them,
Yeah.
solar energy, we're harnessing the power of the sun, and we're not creating any emissions.
So by using solar, we're helping to reduce our reliance on those polluting fossil fuels.
Exactly. It's a really powerful way to reduce our carbon footprint
Okay.
and help fight climate change. And it's not just about reducing our impact. Solar energy also has this incredible potential for the future.
Yeah, it seems like we're hearing more and more about solar energy these days, like it's becoming more accessible or something. Is that true?
Oh, absolutely. The technology is constantly getting better. Solar panels are becoming more efficient, and they're getting cheaper.
Wow.
And we're also seeing huge improvements in battery storage capacity, so we can store even more of that solar energy for later use.
So it's getting easier and cheaper to harness and store the sun's energy. That's great.
It is.
Are there any other cool advancements happening in solar?
Oh, there are so many. For example, we're seeing a lot of innovation in smart grid integration.
Okay.
So that allows those solar energy systems to work really well with the power grid that's already in place.
Oh, okay.
So any excess energy that your panels generate can actually be fed back into the grid.
Wow.
So it's creating this more resilient and decentralized energy system, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible how far we've come.
Yeah.
We started with those simple photovoltaic cells, and now we have these really complex systems
It's true.
that can power whole communities.
Yeah.
And they can even contribute to the larger power grid.
That's right. And it really shows how innovative we can be,
Yeah.
and how we can come up with sustainable solutions to the big challenges we're facing.
It's like we've unlocked this amazing secret that's been right in front of us the whole time.
It has.
This powerful source of energy that's literally been shining down on us for billions of years.
Yeah, and we're finally figuring out how to really use it. And as we get better at it, solar energy is going to play a huge part in building a sustainable future.
I love it. This has been such a cool deep dive. We went from the heart of the sun
Yeah,
to the microscopic world of atoms.
we did.
And we saw how sunlight gets turned into electricity. I mean, who knew that sunshine was so powerful?
It's truly remarkable. And now that you've gotten this little peek into the world of solar energy, what do you think? What do you see as the biggest opportunities or challenges even for solar energy going forward? We'd love to know what you think. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.